So now we're going to turn our attention to Dan Scripps, who is the chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission. You can unmute there, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's the second time. You're a two-time offender now, right? So you've come back. So I guess we did. Matt, unfortunately, today, the first day of school at Lawrence Tech, so he's a bit tied up with that. A few things going on there, right? So you've got me. What I wanted to talk to you about, and I don't know what the MPSC can do, but let's just say there's a lot of really upset people right now. Friends of mine named Paul Eisenstein, who we had on my other show on Monday, he's still gone 7 days without power, and so people are looking at you guys saying, "What can you do, or is there anything you can do with DTE and Consumers and any of the other electricity providers to make this stop?" For instance, here I lived in Ann Arbor, big cosmopolitan area, right? I've lost power 3 times now. And so, I even complained to DTE, and they just said, well, a lot of it is trees and things like that. But again, we're just saying, is there anything that you guys can do at the Michigan Public Service Commission?
Yeah, there is. And in fact, there's a fair amount of work going on in this regard. We've had, storms before, and in 2013 and in 2017 launched inquiries into what had happened and how do we make sure that we're next time. And coming out of that, we've started to accelerate some of the dollars associated with tree trimming. It is the number one cause of outages. And then also to require the distribution utility, consumers and DTE and others to put in their distribution plans metrics around outages, number of outages, how long the outages are going to last, customers that are experiencing, like you did, multiple outages over the course of a year, because that absolutely gets frustrating to folks that they have something that they need to rely on, particularly when they're trying to work from home or learn from home during COVID, and the lights keep going out. And so we're really focused on trying to improve the performance of our distribution system. This last week shows that we still have a long way to go, clearly. But I will say, when you look at some of the circuits that have been trimmed, when you've looked at some of the places where that accelerated tree trimming has come through, they're performing better than the others. And it just shows that, we've got to do more, and we've got to do it faster. And that's really been the focus. The other part is on the credit side. So in Michigan today, if you are out for a specified amount of time, you're eligible for a $25 credit, which clearly, if you lost a freezer full of food, or if your medical care was interrupted, doesn't make you whole. And we recognize that. But we do want to make sure that we're keeping up with where things are. So in updating our service quality rules, which we're in the process of really getting ready to launch, we're doing a couple things. We're trying to make those credits automatic. Right now, you have to apply for them, which is a big discouragement, frustrating for a lot of people. We're trying to increase them, so go from $25 to $35. And then we're trying to make it so that once you're eligible, once you get that credit, that you can get an extra $2 for every additional hour that you're out. Because, when you're out for 7 days, that's a different feeling than if you're out for a day or two, and really trying to have the level of the credit reflect that. So a fair amount going on, but again, as this week proved, this last week, we've got more work to do in front of us.
Yeah, one of the things we discussed a week ago, Monday, I had Paul Eisenstein and Michelle Krebs. Michelle Krebs from Auto Trader and Paul from the Detroit Bureau. We were talking about electric vehicles. Well, anyway, since Paul had been out without power for 7 days and had to move to his cottage in order to, even do the show, we were really concerned about moving forward with all the emphasis there is now on the Detroit Tree and everyone else to get into electric vehicles and charging stations and all the rest of that. Is the grid going to be able to handle that?
That's the question everybody's asking, and we've got to make sure that the answer to it is yes. That as we try and electrify transportation, we've got to make sure that the grid's ready, that we aren't the bottleneck in sort of that transition. And again, I think we've got some work to do, but I think the problem statement is clear. I think from the commission's perspective, that there's real focus on making sure that we're getting granular, and there's a whole bunch of things, including the distribution plans that previously were never required, but the utilities this summer filed their second version of those. We're looking at them now, encourage folks to weigh in if they're interested in making their voice known or heard on whether the proposed investments and the plans laid out are adequate for where we're going as a state and where we're going as a society. But we've got to make sure that the answer to that is yes. And the flip side, of course, is, we heard stories and over the course of the outage, including, I think there was a Birmingham wedding where they lost power and they had a couple of Ford engineers with their new F-150 trucks, the hybrid version, not even the fully electric ones. They were able to plug it back in and feed power from their vehicles to the grid and saved the wedding. I mean, it's a great story, but it also shows that the realities of how we're thinking about the distribution grid and maintaining reliability and the resilience, and the role of electric vehicles, they're not just takers anymore. I think the future is getting here faster than we thought it would, but we've got to make sure that as regulators and as a state, we're ready for the changes that are taking place, and including making sure that we've got a grid that can handle it.
I believe a couple of weeks ago, because I reported on it, you put out a request for a proposal for storage mediums for the big utilities to have if they're using solar and wind. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow. And as we know, we only get sunshine for part of the day. A buddy of mine, for instance, has solar on his roof, but he doesn't have any storage system. So when the sun goes down, that electricity goes away. So do you think that will be, as we go with more and more, I'll call it green energy, that's one of the ways to go?
Yeah, I think it is. And looking at how we maximize the value both to individual homeowners with solar panels on their roof and maybe storage assets in their garages, but also for the whole grid, those distributed energy resources and what they look like and how they get interconnected, how they're compensated, how we make sure that the safety of the system is preserved and indeed enhanced. Those are the big questions that we're wrestling with. But I absolutely see storage, batteries as part of the solution set. And again, the events of this last week show when you give people the tools to make their own investments in some of that resilience, make sure that they're going to be okay, that there's an interest and there's absolutely a need for it.
Yeah. The other thing, too, moving forward, certainly there are no coal-fired plants or nuclear plants on the horizon coming online. And so the capacity is going to have to be taken up, but again, we'll call it green energy. So how is all that going to be? Are you going to encourage more? Are you going to provide more incentives? How are you going to get the big utilities more involved in that, or do you need to, for that matter?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk a lot about sort of who's driving the bus on this. And I don't think as regulators, we're driving the bus on the transitions taking place. But I absolutely think we need to make sure we don't get run over by the bus, just to butcher that analogy. And, it's not us that's demanding the renewables. We've met our statutory targets, but it's customers, GM and Ford and others saying, we want more of our energy to come from renewables and we want to work through our utility to get that. And I think the programs that the utilities have proposed, required by the changes in the energy laws in 2016 in Michigan, are helping us move down that path. Our planning process, which really forces us and requires us to look at the broad portfolio of options and then whether the utilities are optimizing their choices on both the demand side and the generation side, are resulting in more renewables getting built because they're cheaper, because they're more attractive to customers. And so there's a fair amount of work that's taking place. And again, I don't know that we're driving that, but we're seeing it. We're making sure that we're ready for it.
And then in terms of pricing, where do you see that going with for the huge demand? I mean, particularly with people like me, I'm working from a home office and a lot of other folks are too. And a lot of if you look at my MITechNews, we've got all these studies now that people are saying, I don't want to go back into the office. So, but by being home, they're consuming a lot more electricity than they would if they were in the office. So I guess that's part of, is the grid ready for what we all thought was going to be a long ways off? Well, it's now here, just like boom, here you go,
Yeah, no, I've been talking a lot in a lot of different contexts. The future is here. It's here today, ready or not. And I say this from my kids' playroom, so I've made the same changes that a lot of others have. But it is, and I think in terms of the pricing, in terms of who pays for the cost of the system, we're trying to figure out whether some of the usage changes that we've seen during COVID are likely to sort of go back to sort of the new normal, or what the new normal looks like, or whether they're permanent. And how we think about that and answer that has a big deal in terms of allocation of the cost of the grid. And similarly, the change in the resource type, some of these new resources that are coming online are in fact cheaper than the resources they're replacing. That's great news for customers. The flip side is that both the backlog in costs and the cost of updating the grid to be adequate for what we need it for, those costs are significant. And so we're getting, some tailwind, which helps, but an awful lot of expense that we're looking at. How do you balance reliability and affordability for customers so that the grid does what we all need it to do, but that we don't break the bank along the way? And those are, big challenges, but I'll say we've got a lot of great people working on them.
Another issue, this may or may not be in your wheelhouse, but let me bring it up. One of the attack vectors that bad guys do, for instance, the Colonial Pipeline. Now, that was something quite different. However, I've been working and covering the electrical grid for a long time, and I work real close with ITC and other folks like them, doing a wonderful job, by the way. But at the same time, they're battling constantly to keep the bad guys out. Now, are you guys taking a look at that and saying to these utilities, do you need to beef up your whatever you want to counter hacker technology or anything along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually joining you from, I just stepped off of a critical infrastructure committee national group that's focused on critical infrastructure in the utility sector. Basically, every single meeting we have today is on cyber protections. We've updated our rules around cyber protections in the last couple of years. We work with utilities on annual reports, plus more frequent if anything were to happen, just to make sure that they're always asking the questions. And a while ago, we made the decision not to require sort of a certain level of performance or for you to have this software suite or anything else, because honestly, by the time that we required that, it'd be out of date and the bad guys have moved on. But it is a process approach that makes sure that you're always asking the questions. You're always testing the limits of your system, that you're going back and pushing, and that it's sort of a continuous process where you're never ever done. And I think that's the new reality, honestly. But by taking that approach, I can't say for certain that we're going to be 100% protected, but I do think that we're going to constantly be evaluating the system, poking it, trying to figure out its vulnerabilities and then addressing them in a way that sort of, as long as we really make it continuous and continue to make it a priority, that we're going to be as safe as we can be. And then the flip side is we got to make sure that we're resilient, that if something bad were to happen, we can get it back up and online quickly, because this is life and death for a lot of folks. And when you think about the critical nature of our electric and gas systems, we don't have a whole lot of error room.
Yeah, I suppose in the summer you can, if you have to, you can sweat it out at a house. But in the wintertime, when it's 10 degrees, well, that's an entirely different situation where you're not sweating anymore. You worry about whether you're going to freeze to death, right? So
no, absolutely. And I'll say that, this outage system obviously was mid-August, and it's sort of what we've gotten used to. But you think back to 2013 and the ice storm. You think back to 2019 and the polar vortex and the stress that was on our system. That was ultimately a good news story. And then you think to February of this year and what we saw in Texas and some other down south, and it's, these are real and they're inconvenient in the best of times, but they quickly become sort of emergency level when they happen in the winter. And we're seeing that they can happen anytime. We've got to make sure that our grid, both on the gas side and the electric side, is resilient against these sort of outages.
All right. So we're coming to the end of your segment, Dan Scripps, chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission. I know a lot of folks may want to say something to the MPSC or reach out to you now and have something they want to complain about, or even congratulate you for that matter. How do they do that? How do they reach you guys? Sure.
Probably the easiest way, particularly for your listeners who are tech savvy, is to go to our website, michigan.gov/MPSC. There's a link right to our customer assistance division. You can file a complaint. You can even share some congratulations if you're so moved, but we don't get as many of those.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Dan. I really appreciate it. Hope to get you back on the show again real soon.
Appreciate it, Mike. Always like being here.